Welcome back to another video on the law of attraction. Now, in today's video, I want to touch a little bit about on the meditation and hypnotherapy and self-hypnosis and those kinds of things. Now, first of all, just a disclaimer that I'm not a hypnotherapy specialist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a professional in any way. I'm just a guy that shares advice on life, things that I've done in my life to improve my life, and patterns that I see in other people, and what I've observed and what I've learned throughout the last 18 years in my own life. And so I want to touch on hypnotherapy, meditation, whatever you want to call it. It's all kind of the same thing to me. I'm sure you get different kinds of methods and different purposes of applying these things. But I want to tell you a few stories of how it absolutely transformed my life and kept me from going down a very deep rabbit hole. And so the first story, I'm just going to jump into it, and I'm not going to give you the entire story because it might be a little bit long leading up to why I got to that space. So I'm just going to give you the brief overview, but I'm going to try and explain the severity of the condition that I was in and how I used the law of not the law of attraction, the hypnotherapy essentially to get myself out of that. Because the reason why I want to do that is I want to express the absolute power that hypnotherapy or meditation can have on you. Now, a lot of people might know about meditation where you sit down with your knees crossed and your legs crossed, and you just listen to music and you close your eyes and you sit there and just take in the serenity and the tranquility of the moment. And that is something that is very, very popular, and it's also something that is very helpful. I mean, it just calms your mind. It's a very good space to be in, especially if you're somebody that are prone to anxiety or prone to overthinking. That just kind of calms your mind. So it's a very good practice to do. But what I'm talking about specifically is reprogramming the mind, because obviously by now, if you're watching this video, I'm sure that you know that all of us operate as a result of having a few programs in our subconscious mind. And it dictates our actions, and those actions dictate obviously the results that we get from life. So if you have this program in your subconscious mind, then in some cases, many of these programs are not helping us. They are actually sabotaging us. So in a lot of cases, in most cases. And if you're watching this my videos on the law of attraction, it means that you want to manifest something, but something's holding you back. Now, in all cases, it is the reason why you can't just take the action needed in order to move yourself towards the thing that you want is because you have these limiting beliefs in your mind that you need to get rid of. Now, as in an awakened state, we have a way of thinking about these problems or these things that hold us back. And it's almost impossible, because as soon as you start thinking about these things, and I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you want to get into a relationship and you believe, but subconsciously you believe that you're not good enough, you're not worthy of a healthy relationship. Or let's say you want to make money and deep down you believe that you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough, you're not you might be too shy to go and sell something to somebody, or you might believe that you don't have the skill to start a business or the energy to start a business, or whatever the case might be. So that's a limiting belief that's obviously holding you back. Now, I want to tell you a few stories about how I have been able to transform my life in that regard. Now, the first and most recent, well, not the first, I've done it in a previously as well, but most recently that's had the most profound effect on my life. So a few years ago, it was about 5 years ago, and so about 5 years ago, I ended up in hospital. Now, what led up to myself being hospitalized was, and this is going to sound extremely ridiculous to maybe a lot of people, but I'm just sharing the story. It's what it is, right? So for as long as I can remember, something like because I've got an obsession, OCD mind, like an obsessive compulsive disorder mind. So I overthink a lot of things, well, everything for that matter. So I heard something or I read something, I don't really know where it started, but I developed this obsession with having a stroke, right? So, and somewhere I believed at the time, and I'm not talking 5 years ago, I'm talking like 10 years ago, I was smoking. And I knew that a bunch of other things like too much salt intake, and I know it's contrary to what a lot of experts say today, but too much salt intake can increase your blood pressure, and obviously high blood pressure might lead to eventually having a stroke. So those kind of basic things I knew, or I read about it, or I heard it somewhere. Now, obviously, I mean, that's just at a very basic level. So I've got no medical background at all. So I just heard these things, and I started obsessing about these things. And I knew, okay, I was taking in a lot of salt, and I was smoking, and I was doing a few other things that I believed would contribute to myself having blood pressure. So I kept this idea in my mind for such a long time. I kept on repeatedly thinking about this condition that I might have, that at some point I adopted that condition as part of myself. I identified with a person with high blood pressure. So whenever I go and visit a doctor for whichever reason, might be a little bit sick, go to the doctor will ask me, do you have any conditions? And I would say I have high blood pressure, even though it's never been identified or diagnosed by any medical professional whatsoever. I just kind of self-diagnosed myself, because I almost felt that if I said that, they wouldn't give me any medication or treatment or anything that will even have the possibility to raise my blood pressure, right? Because I was so terrified of having high blood pressure and then eventually having a stroke. So for some reason, I just had this fear in my mind, and that progressively got worse over the years, because anything, as you would know, anything that you hold in your mind consistently and constantly will grow. That will become a much bigger thing than it actually is. So I was keeping this in the back of my mind the whole time. So I progressively became more fearful of myself having a stroke, to such an extent where I would literally feel some kind of pain in my head, even though that might not even be some of the symptoms of having a stroke or high blood pressure. But I would have this pinch in my neck or my head, and then immediately I would have like a panic attack, and I would wake up at night all sweating and all nervous, thinking that, okay, this is now the day that I'm going to have a stroke and possibly die, or something bad's going to happen. And that progressively got worse, to such an extent where I quit smoking, because I love smoking. I'm not condoning smoking. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm absolutely against it, even though at that time I enjoyed it quite a bit. So, but I knew that or in my mind, that was kind of the only way. So I quit smoking, just because of this fear, right? And then fast forward a couple of years, I started using ADHD medication, which is a stimulant medication. So, and obviously before you start any medication or any serious kind of medication like that, I read up on the side effects of it. So obviously one of the side effects was increased in blood pressure, right? So that was always in the back of my mind, that this is obviously going to increase my blood pressure. So I was kind of fearful for this stuff, but I also needed it to perform in my job, because I've got ADHD. So I used this medication, but always as I'm using this, I always had the subconscious fear of like, one day this stuff's going to kill me, right? And then it progressed again. Fast forward a couple of years, I was using it for about 2 years, and this idea that this is going to cause me to get a stroke just became so bad. It became such a big thing that at one time, I remember I was taking the medication and I went to work, and at that time I already started a business, and I was at the office, and I just felt this rise in my blood pressure, even though I didn't even know what it truly felt like. But to me, that was an indication. I knew that I was my blood pressure was just sky high, So I had a full-blown panic attack, jumped in my car, went to the pharmacy, got a blood pressure monitor, and I monitored it. And obviously, because of the anxiety and the increased heart rate, my blood pressure was high. So I'm like, okay, I knew it. This is now the end. And so I scheduled an emergency meeting with the doctor, an appointment, went there, and as this guy so calmly having a chat to me, it was a doctor that I didn't know. I've never seen him in my life. It was just at where I was in that area. So, and I was panicking because I'm like, I was wanting to say to this doctor, listen, I don't have time, I'm going to have a stroke now, so you better prescribe me some high blood pressure medication or hypertensive medication, because I need to take it now just to lower it, otherwise I'm going to have a stroke right now. And he was just calmly having a chat to me and examining me and etc. And eventually I convinced him to prescribe me some medication. So I got the medication, anxiety went down, and everything was fine. But then I stopped the medication, the ADHD medication, because I obviously at that stage I was like, okay, this is now increasing my blood pressure. And fast forward about 3 months after that, it was into the new year, it was January, and we had a lot to do at the company, and I had to really perform. So I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to take a chance, I'm going to take this medication again. And I took the medication, went to the office, and after about 2-3 hours, I ate something, and immediately I started having a panic attack, because now I could feel that same feeling coming back, and the blood pressure just rising and rising and rising. It didn't go away. Even though afterwards, I mean, some of you might be listening to this thinking that, you know what, it's just not possible physiologically, and I know that now. But at the time, if you have a fear that is not rational, then your mind can tell you anything. So then I rushed home, and I knew that this ADHD medication, was a long-acting medication, which means it stays in your system for about 12 hours. So I knew I had to survive, and I was pacing up and down. I was breathing heavily, and I was having panic attack after panic attack, hour after hour after hour, until that evening, when eventually, according to my mind, or in my mind, the medication should be worked out now. And then everything was fine. I went to bed, and I was calmed down. And the next morning I had some coffee, and right after my coffee, I didn't have any medication, but that same feeling came back. And immediately in my mind, what I thought was that this medication has now damaged my body to such an extent where it doesn't even need the medication anymore. I'm just having this rising my blood pressure spontaneously. And then that happened again and again and again. And then it didn't stop at all. It was consistent. That feeling of my blood pressure rising just happened hour after hour after hour. Now this went on for about 3 months. Now during that 3 months, and I tried everything. I went to about 20 specialists, medical examiners, doctors, everybody. Nobody could figure out what was wrong, and I just kept saying to them, listen, my blood pressure is high. So every time they would measure it, it would be high because of my anxiety. And a lot of people said to me, they think that it's just anxiety, and I just did not accept that theory or that explanation. I kept on reading up about high blood pressure and what are the symptoms and the causes, etc. And so every time I would identify with one of the symptoms and one of the leading causes, and eventually it got so bad where I believed that if I stand up or if I sit up, my blood pressure rises even higher. So I ended up for about a month that I would literally lie flat on my back on the couch. I slept there. I laid there every single second of every single day. I didn't get up. And then eventually it just got worse and worse. And my wife at the time, obviously she didn't know what was going on, because I was so convincing to her, to myself and to her as well, that this is the end, right? I'm not going to make it. If I get up, I'm going to have a stroke. So fortunately, I got an appointment, or I got a hospital bed in a hospital. So I went to a hospital and they did a number of tests. They put probes on my head. And this sounds extremely crazy, even for myself thinking about it now. But that's just the power of the mind, the power of the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind can believe any lie you tell it. So they did a battery of tests on me and they couldn't find anything wrong. And then I remember one of the specialists came in the morning in the hospital, and I said, you know what, because obviously the day before they did a number of tests, and I said, well, what's the result? What's wrong with me? Because according to, if you Google it, it can be anything from a brain tumor to thyroid disease or cancer or whatever. And I was just hoping for something, that they pick up something so that we know what it is, so that they can either remove the tumor or fix it or give me medication, whatever, right? So I was even willing to accept that I might have a brain tumor. That would be better than not knowing what's causing this rise in blood pressure. And I remember her saying to me, you know what, because I assume from a medical standpoint, you cannot say to somebody, you know what, there's nothing wrong with you. I don't know. But I remember her saying to me, you know what, I don't know what to say to you. And I knew, I could see in her demeanor, I could see that there's nothing wrong according to the test. And I remember saying to her, so what you're telling me is that it's all in my head. And she's like, I don't know what to tell you. And I knew that was confirmation that yes, it is, right? And right there, I got a bit clarity in that moment. And I was like, okay, so maybe I need to entertain this idea that it's all in my mind. And I mean, this has been coming now for 10 plus years, that I've been programming this fear and this condition into my mind. I became one with hypertension, high blood pressure, having a stroke. I became one of that. And she said to me, well, and I assumed, or I then had this moment of clarity that I realized, okay, maybe there's a possibility. Maybe I need to entertain the possibility that it might be my mind and just all in my mind. And she left, the specialist left, and I knew, okay, now I have to fix myself. But I mean, if you have a broken bone, you can take an x-ray, you can see that that's tangible and you can actually fix it. But not knowing what's wrong with you in your mind, that's a very scary thing, because nobody can open it up and see, okay, you've got this belief, so let's just kind of take that out and fix you. And you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do. But during that time, I watched a series on Kaya about Dr. Joe Dispenza, about the power of the mind and all of that. And I thought to myself, okay, I need to now fix myself. And prior to that, I've been meditating a bunch. I've been meditating for years, but it was always the standard meditation where you put on some music in your ears and cover your eyes and just sit quietly and enjoy the tranquility of that moment. But I've never really reprogrammed anything in my mind to that extent. So I knew that I had to reprogram my mind. So just to add this to the story, which I actually forgot, every time I would have this feeling was about 20 minutes after I ate something. So I firmly believed that the medication, the ADHD drug, damaged something in my body that tolerated food. And now my body was not able to tolerate the food, and then that will rise my blood pressure, because every time it was just like clockwork. Every time I would eat something, 20 minutes later, I would have these immense pains in my head, in the back of my head. And so what ended up happening, and that's kind of the reason why I ended up in hospital, was for about 2 months I quit eating altogether. I didn't eat anything because I was too afraid of eating anything, because that will, in my mind, raise my blood pressure and then give me a stroke. So I lost about, I almost want to say about, I think it was about 18 pounds in that 2 months, which is a lot for me because I don't have a lot to lose. So I ended up completely bedridden, couldn't eat anything at all. I was just drinking water and tried soup. Same happened, so I couldn't even take in soup or anything. So in my mind, any food that I consume would just raise my blood pressure. So I ended up not eating at all. So then fast forward to that moment where I realized maybe it is all in my mind. I say to myself, because because when I was admitted to hospital, obviously then they come to you, in the hospital I was, they come to you and they ask you like what's your food preferences, etc., so that for every meal they know what to bring you. So at the beginning when I was admitted, I said to them, you know what, I'm not eating, so don't bother. So at that moment I said, I need to face this fear now, and even if it means myself like dying, but that's the only option I have, because in my mind I was anyway going to die because I wasn't eating at all. So I might as well take this chance while I'm observed by professionals, by medical doctors, who can maybe help me. So I called the staff and I said, you know what, can you please bring me food, right? It was some like beans and mashed carrot meal. And what I did was I had my face mask on or over my head, and I had my earphones in, and I had a very tranquil meditative playlist on my phone ready. So I would sit my bed up, elevate my bed, and I took a big spoonful of the carrots and beans, and I put it in my mouth and I swallowed it. And as I swallowed it, I would drop my bed down and immediately start that playlist and just go into this, because I knew 20 minutes later my body would start rejecting it and my blood pressure would rise. So I had a bite, and then I would drop my bed down immediately, start the playlist, and then go into an absolutely deep meditative state. And the first time I already knew, because it was happening now for a couple of months, so I already knew how long more or less 20 minutes was. And the whole time as I went into this meditative state, I would say to myself, there's absolutely no connection between your stomach and your intestines and your blood pressure, the blood pressure in your head, in your brain. I would constantly kind of reaffirming that to myself. And 20 minutes came and nothing happened. I didn't feel that sharp pinch in my head. And so I got out of that. I waited another 10 minutes, got out of that meditative state, took another bite, dropped back, started the playlist again, reaffirming to myself over and over and over again that there's no connection. It is not possible for your stomach and food to alter your blood pressure, to affect your blood pressure, to raise your blood pressure. There's no way. And I kept on saying that to myself over and over and over again. Another 20 minutes came and went and nothing happened. So I did that for a third time. And this time I was a bit more aware. I wasn't as in such a deep state. Consciously I did this because I wanted to kind of be aware to see whether or not this is now actually happening, or was I just so deep in meditation that I didn't realize that. But the whole time keep saying that same story over and over to myself. And that whole process took me about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Let's call it 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, and remember, prior to that, for the last couple of months, I could not stand up because in my mind, I would have a full-blown panic attack as soon as I stand up. And I came out of that third session. I sat up, I got out of bed, I walked to the bathroom, and I drank some water, and I walked back and got back into bed, and nothing happened. And I could not do that. So 10 years of fear, 10 years of absolute terror, the idea in my mind terrorizing me for 10 years had been fixed in under 2 hours. And that's just the power of analyzing and focusing on a problem and finding a solution and speaking the reality, the truth of what is actually happening in a state of in a meditative state, a state of hypnosis. So that's what I want to get through to a lot of you watching this. If you are struggling with something, there's no point in being in your conscious state of mind and trying to think positive thoughts or trying to think the alternative to the belief that you have. But going deep into a meditative state where you shut down all of the analytical thinking, the analytical mind, we can actually be present and actually talk to your subconscious mind and question the validity of the belief that it has. You don't need to do that for months or years. A lot of people will say you need to master meditation, and you need to be able to shut out all of your surroundings, and just become one with your soul and your body. That's not necessary. You can be as present still as you are now, just in a lower state of attentive awareness, where you can actually just think about that problem, that belief that you have, isolate it, and then reprogramming that. That's the power of that. I remember my wife's parents, they were smokers for about 40 years. They went to another guy that claimed he can get rid of your smoking addiction in one session. And both her mom and her dad went for this hypnotherapy session, one session, and both of them quit smoking immediately after that one session. That is the power of hypnotherapy. That's the power of going into your subconscious mind in a meditative state and reprogramming consciously the disbelief or false information that you have in your mind that's been holding you back for maybe 10 years, maybe 20, maybe 40 years. Something might have been holding you back. You might have always struggled with finances, with money. And whatever you do, you just cannot seem to get yourself so far to start a business or quit your job and go for a new job that might pay you better, or that might be a better working environment, or whatever the case might be. Or you might be very alone, not having a partner, never have had a partner, but you just cannot get yourself to actually approach somebody and ask them out or just befriend them. And you've been alone for 30 years now, 40 years, or whatever the case might be. And I'm saying to you that there's so much power in hypnotherapy, in self-hypnosis, that you can cure that. You can alter the course of your life in an hour or maybe 2 hours. Maybe one session, maybe 2 sessions. But in all the cases, I'm not going to share the other cases now because this video is getting too long now, but I'll do that in a follow-up video maybe. Comment below if you want to hear more stories of how I've been able to overcome things that I've never been able in 35 years to overcome in my life. And in one session, I've just been able to open it up and let go of the things that's been holding me back. So I just want to express how powerful, how absolutely powerful. I think people are underestimating this. People are not focused on self-hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and the power of it enough. There's all of these motivational videos where you need to get up every morning and you need to work hard and you need to stay consistent, you need to do all of that. But nobody touches on the part of the mind that's holding people back. Like, you can have all the motivation in the world, you can have discipline, all the discipline in the world. If you have a negative belief that's holding you back, you can have discipline for the first 5 days, but after that belief's going to overpower you and overpower your body and your mind, and you are going to revert back to your old patterns and habits, because you cannot get rid of that in any other way. That's why sometimes certain traumas in people's lives alter the course of their lives, because that trauma is something that can immediately change certain beliefs in one's mind. But under a hypnotic state, you can do the same without having to have that trauma. So if you want more information, comment below and tell me if you want me to do a video where I can literally I can use different examples. Give me an example for that matter. Comment below what you've been struggling with for a very long time, something that you've been wanting to manifest. You want that in your life, you've never been able to get that, and something's holding you back, and you just feel so frustrated, you don't know what it is, and you don't know what to do. And then I can maybe release a video on where I take you down a very effective hypnotherapy session where you can actually have profound changes in your life. Again, I'm not a professional, I'm just a guy who's obsessed about these things and who's seen the effect it had on my own life. And I know that there are so many people, like I believe millions of people, who can benefit from accessing this information, from actually practicing self-hypnosis and really changing the course of their lives. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.